Let me begin with a quote. Quote 3. If tithing were indeed a genuine New Covenant doctrine, then it must be the only silent doctrine not supported by a single post-Calvary text. End quote. I will get to this in my defense of the tithe. Now, here's another quote. Quote, objection. The book of Acts demonstrates that all early Christians gave much more than a tithe and set an example for others to follow. Unquote. Now, this chapter deals with objections of tithe teachers that Dr. Kelly is refuting, and I will give my commentary concerning the matter. Dr. Kelly states that the sacrificial offerings in the early church do not advocate tithing, since the funds ran out years later. To state that the church naturally went beyond the tithe is wrongly assumed. I do agree that funds ran out, so sacrificial giving, though important at times, is not the same as consistent giving like that of the tithe. If you look through the scriptures, God gave Joseph the wisdom to put aside a certain percent or an additional tithe for 7 years. So when the 7 years of famine came, the provision was there. I see no reason why we can't learn from the early church and see that a consistent flow of support, like the tithe, is better in the long run than sporadic giving. Quote, objection. Tithing is not mentioned because it was not an issue. End quote. Dr. Charlie Stanley mentions this, and Dr. Kelly rebukes him in trying to build a doctrine from silence. However, I will show tithing from the scriptures themselves. Quote, objection. Since New Covenant standards are higher than Old Covenant standards, the tithe is the minimum starting place. End quote. Actually, there's a logic to this, believe it or not. For those that tithe, what could be the minimum when 10% has already been set in stone? To those that don't believe in the tithe for the New Testament, then in the light of Romans 12:1, which states, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. So, what is the minimum sacrifice amount one should give? What is the reasonable service when it comes to giving? I am curious to see if your answer is based on silence, since Dr. Stanley was accused of just that. Quote, objection. Tithing was not a form of taxation. End quote. I see no reason to argue either way, since in the Old Covenant, tithe was based on that which had increase or the gross income from the Holy Land. But the New Covenant is based on the increase or the gross income of God. Quote 5. The New Covenant replaces Mosaic law tithing with many general principles, which range from 0% to 100%. End quote. Really? So if the Bible commands us to give support as a wage to those that labor in the gospel, and Dr. Kelly says giving can begin at 0, then isn't that proof that Dr. Kelly believes that one can rebel against the command of the Lord? I mean, if you're giving 0, then how are you giving? Yet Dr. Kelly also stated, quote, while an old covenant wealthy person could stop giving at 10% and meet the requirements of the Mosaic law, the same wealthy person is violating the higher New Covenant principle when he stops at 10%. The New Covenant higher principle of equality expects all believers to give free will offerings spontaneously because they have a new nature and want to give above that which they normally would. While all give spontaneously from a willing heart, the above 10% of the wealthy should more than offset the below 10% of the poor. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 12 through 15, end quote. Here's another one. Quote, although they may actually give less than 10%, even the poor are commended for giving above and beyond their ability, end quote. So, how does Dr. Kelly explain from 0% and yet all were to give? How can all give if a person starts at 0%? For if the poor are not to tithe because it is too much of a burden, but were commended for giving above and beyond their ability, then there seems to be a contradiction. What Dr. Kelly has done is actually what he has accused others of. He has made a claim that the wealthy person is violating the higher New Covenant principles, which he stops at 10%. Since he claims that there is no text post-Calvary that tells the believer how much to give, then how can he say that a wealthy person is violating a New Covenant principle if they don't give more than 10%? How can he also say that the amount to give is from 0 to 100%? Where is the scripture that backs that up? The point that I am making is simple. If giving is only what one purposes from the heart, then what some may consider an act of faith is really an act of playing it safe. If one never gave to a church before, he may think $5 is a lot to give as he's riding his brand new Lexus. Unless he's taught otherwise, why would you think he would give more?